Hello everyone, and a very warm welcome to Niu Law Academy, our lecture series on UK Tort Law. I'm Luke Niu, and I'm excited to be your guide through this fascinating area of law. I understand that all of you have come to realise the importance of studying the law of foreign countries, which is a significant step in your academic journey. Some of you might feel very comfortable with English, while others might find it more challenging, and that's perfectly okay. We're going to explore UK tort law together, and I promise to explain everything as clearly as possible. Remember, improving your English is part of your learning experience here, but it's your understanding of tort law that matters most in this course. First, let's talk about what tort law is. In simple terms, tort law is about civil wrongs. When we say civil, we mean it's not about criminal law. Instead, it's about how people or organisations can be held responsible when they cause harm to others, even if they didn't mean to. You might be wondering, why is this important? Well, tort law is everywhere in our daily lives, even if we don't notice it. It's there when you buy a product and expect it to be safe. It's there when you walk on the sidewalk and trust it to be in good condition. It's even there when you read a newspaper and expect the information to be true. In this series, we're going to explore many aspects of UK tort law. We'll look at its history, where these laws came from and how they've changed over time. We'll learn about different types of torts, like negligent torts, intentional torts, strict liability torts, and some other tortious acts that do not fit neatly into those categories. We'll discuss famous court cases that have shaped tort law. Don't worry if you're not familiar with UK cases, we'll explain each one clearly. We'll also talk about how tort law is changing to deal with new challenges, like problems caused by new technologies. I know that legal language can be tricky, especially if English isn't your first language. Don't worry, I'll explain any difficult terms as we go along. Now, let's start our journey into UK tort law. Are you ready? Tort law is a branch of civil law that deals with wrongs committed by one party against another, resulting in injury, harm, or loss. The primary aim of tort law is to provide remedies to the injured party and to deter others from committing similar wrongs in the future. In UK tort law, we generally recognise three main categories of torts: intentional torts, negligent torts, and strict liability torts. This categorization is particularly useful because it helps us understand the fundamental principles underlying different torts and the varying standards of liability. Let's examine each of these in turn. Intentional torts are those where the defendant intends to perform the action that causes harm. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean they intend to cause harm, but they do intend the act itself. Can anyone give me an example of an intentional tort? Excellent. Some common examples of intentional torts include trespass to the person, which includes battery, assault, and false imprisonment; trespass to land, trespass to goods; defamation, both libel and slander. Let's take battery as an example. If I were to deliberately push someone, that would be battery. I've intended the act, the push, even if I didn't intend to cause harm. The key here is that in all these cases, the defendant has made a conscious decision to act in a certain way, even if they didn't foresee or intend the consequences of that act. Moving on to our second category, negligent torts. These are torts where the harm is caused by the defendant's failure to meet the standard of care required by law. Unlike with intentional torts, the defendant doesn't intend to cause harm, but their carelessness leads to damage. The primary example here is, of course, negligence itself. The key elements of negligence are a duty of care, breach of that duty, causation, damage. Negligence principles can also apply in other contexts, such as professional negligence, occupier's liability, although this has a statutory basis as well, and some cases of nuisance. Our final category is strict liability torts. These are perhaps the most straightforward in terms of establishing liability, but they're also the least common. In strict liability torts, the defendant can be held liable regardless of fault. It doesn't matter whether they intended to cause harm or were careless. If the specified harm occurs, they are liable. Some key strict liability torts include liability for dangerous animals under the Animals Act 1971, some forms of product liability, some statutory torts. Now, I want to emphasize that while this categorization is useful, it's not perfect. Some torts don't fit neatly into these categories or may have elements of more than one. For instance, nuisance can involve elements of both negligence and strict liability. Product liability can involve elements of negligence, strict liability, and sometimes even intention. The tort of misuse of private information, while often treated as an intentional tort, can sometimes involve negligent disclosure, and breach of statutory duty can be strict liability or require proof of intention or negligence, depending on the statute in question. Before we conclude, I want to briefly mention vicarious liability. This isn't a tort itself, but a doctrine that can apply to torts in any of these categories. It allows liability to be imposed on one person for the torts committed by another, typically in an employment context. To sum up, categorizing torts into intentional, negligent, and strict liability provides us with a clear framework for understanding the basis of liability in different torts. It's particularly useful for grasping the fundamental principles of tort law and the varying standards of fault required. However, always remember, the boundaries between these categories can sometimes be blurred. Some torts may have elements of more than one category. The specific elements of each tort, as defined by case law or statute, are crucial and may not always align perfectly with these broad categories. When you're analysing a tort case, consider which of these categories the tort falls into, as this can provide insights into the principles the court will apply. But always be prepared to look beyond these categories to the specific elements and circumstances of each individual tort and case. Now, let's start with an overview of the chapters and see how these three types of torts we just mentioned are fitted in. Chapters 1 to 3 focus on the tort of negligence, which is the most common type of tort. In Chapter 1, we will discuss the concept of the duty of care, the legal obligation to take reasonable care to avoid causing harm to others. Chapter 2 will explore what constitutes a breach of this duty and how the courts determine whether a defendant has fallen below the required standard of care. In Chapter 3, we will examine the principles of causation and remoteness of damage, which are essential in establishing a link between the defendant's breach of duty and the harm suffered by the claimant. Moving on to Chapter 4, we will study vicarious liability, a doctrine that holds one party, usually an employer, liable for the torts committed by another party, usually an employee, in the course of their employment. This chapter is closely related to Chapter 5, which covers employers' liability and breach of statutory duty. This is direct liability by the employers towards employees, while vicarious liability is by employers towards the victims of the employee's tortious acts. Here we will learn about an employer's responsibilities to ensure the health, safety, and welfare of their employees, and the consequences of failing to do so. Chapter 6 introduces the concept of occupier's liability, which deals with the duties owed by property owners or occupiers to visitors and trespassers. This chapter is linked to Chapters 7 to 9, which cover various property-related torts. Chapter 7 focuses on nuisance, a tort that involves interference with a person's enjoyment of their land. Chapter 8 examines the rule in Rylands v. Fletcher, a unique form of strict liability for escape of dangerous substances from land. Chapter 9 discusses trespass to land, which occurs when a person enters or remains on another's land without permission. In Chapter 10, we will study trespass to the person, which includes the torts of assault, battery, and false imprisonment.
This chapter highlights the importance of protecting an individual's bodily integrity and personal liberty. Chapter 11 addresses the issue of liability for defective products, a crucial area of tort law in our modern consumer-driven society. We will learn about the strict liability imposed on manufacturers, suppliers, and retailers for harm caused by defective products. Chapter 12 covers defamation and privacy, two torts that protect an individual's reputation and right to privacy. In an age of rapid information sharing and social media, understanding these torts is more important than ever. Chapter 13 explores the various defences available to defendants in tort cases, such as consent, self-defence, and necessity. These defences can absolve or limit a defendant's liability, even if they have committed a tort. Finally, Chapter 14 deals with the remedies available in tort law, including damages, monetary compensation, injunctions, court orders prohibiting or mandating certain actions, and restitution, reformation of the claimant to their original position. The choice of remedy depends on the nature of the tort and the harm suffered by the claimant. Throughout this course, we will see how these chapters interconnect and build upon one another to create a comprehensive understanding of UK tort law. We will analyse landmark cases, discuss legal principles, and apply our knowledge to real-world scenarios. By the end of this course, you will have a solid grasp of the key concepts and issues in tort law and be well equipped to analyse and apply this knowledge in your future legal studies and